Welcome to the Connections community. My name is Elizabeth Parks and I'm the president of Parks Associates, a market research and consulting firm focused on emerging consumer technologies. Since 1986, we've been looking closely at emerging products in the home for consumers, consumer devices and services like home security and automation, connected entertainment, connected health, and broadband services in the home. This year would have been our 24th year to host our signature event, Connections, the premier connected home conference. We would also be hosting our 15th annual Connections Europe event in November in Amsterdam. While it's an enormous disappointment that we can't host our in-person events this year, we know they play a huge role in networking, visibility for leading players in the smart home space, and interacting with our analyst team and key players. In place of these events, we're bringing you the Connections community, a virtual experience that will take place through the end of November. We will be live streaming our analysts, industry leaders, and hosting panel discussions through the SwapCard platform, where attendees can log in for live viewing, view past recorded sessions, and interact with fellow Connections community participants during our live sessions. We want to thank our sponsors of our events, many of whom have supported our efforts for years. We really are striving to bring individuals together to network and communicate about the important issues our industries are facing, particularly as we all navigate the new way to accomplish things. Our Connections community platform allows for a live stream view and conversations with our community members. You can ask questions, chat with the group, chat with individuals, and even have a video meeting spontaneously with community members. Following the session, we'll have open networking discussions on video for more dialogue with our analyst team and community members. We have already had some great sessions on the platform as part of the Connections community experience. If you're just joining us, or if you missed a previous session, you can go back on the agenda calendar to watch these on demand. We are excited about our upcoming session on October 28th, covering privacy and security issues. These virtual experiences lead up to 3 days of networking fun, hosted November 10th through the 12th, where Parks Associates will present a state of the smart home market, the value in elevated user experiences, monitoring and expansion beyond security systems, smart home platforms, seniors and technology, and the impact of new technologies focused on proactive and predictive analytics, as well as the impact of 5G and Wi-Fi 6. We are proud to bring together over 1,000 executives so far, with more members joining daily. Our team looks forward to your feedback. For any comments or interest in learning more about visibility options or speaking, please reach out to me or any of our team members. Use the question tab to ask your questions or to upvote your favorite questions from other attendees. You can also answer polling questions under polls to give your live vote. Our analysts and panel speakers will be addressing your questions and the polling answers during the live stream. Ask your questions early in the presentation, as our analysts will choose the most upvoted questions to be addressed by the session speakers. If you have any questions during the stream about SwapCard, our team is standing by to help. Just drop a message in the chat or message one of Parks Associates team members via the Parks Associates company page. We want to make sure you're connecting with our industry-leading sponsors in the smart home space. You can visit any sponsor during the session by navigating to the Sponsors tab, browse sponsors, or bookmark the ones that interest you for later. Contact the sponsor via chat, view uploaded documents, watch welcome videos, and more. Have you created your personal event agenda on SwapCard? Go to the Agenda tab, view different sessions under each date, add the sessions that interest you to your personal event agenda. You can access your personal event agenda by clicking the My Event tab. Export your agenda to your calendar to receive reminders and a direct link to your registered sessions.
Hello and welcome to Connections Community. I'm Brad Russell, Research Director for Connected Home at Parks Associates. Today, I'll be leading a conversation of critical importance for all things IoT. Of course, we're talking about data security and privacy. With billions of points of connectivity and endless rivers of data flowing across networks, data security issues have never been more important. Failure to protect consumers at best tarnishes a brand and at worst costs companies millions of dollars and drives consumer distrust. Now, to fuel our discussion today, we've invited industry experts from across the connected home ecosystem, including manufacturers, security software providers, and services providers. And you're a critical part of the conversation too. You can submit questions for our guest speaker and panelists. You can take part in audience polls and join us after this track in Zoom networking discussions. Of course, we're grateful for our sponsors that have been a part of this event, as well as numerous virtual events that we've hosted this year. These are companies that truly believe that a rising tide lifts all boats. And so they support these kind of network discussions that make all of us more successful. Make sure you visit with them in the SwapCard app and learn more about how their particular solutions and services address a lot of the issues that we're talking about today. Now, here's how we'll use our time. As we've done in prior events, I'll kick off today's track by offering a 10-minute take or so on the topic based on consumer data from our Parks Associates consumer surveys that we conduct on a quarterly basis. Next up, Marcio Aviles with Cujo AI will deliver our visionary insight presentation. Make sure that you get your questions in early using the questions tab in SwapCard to the right of your screen. And then after Marcio, we'll bring in our discussion panel to further explore the topic of mitigating security privacy risks in the home. That will kind of wrap up our SwapCard presentation at 12:30 p.m., but we're not done yet. You're invited to click over to Zoom for one of our 2 video discussion groups. You can find those links at the bottom of your agenda tab in SwapCard. We have 2 groups today, one around the topic of data security, networking, and service providers, and then another around the topic of data security, manufacturers, and support, each of which will be led by one of our Parks Associates analysts. Well, let's dive into our analyst presentation this morning. First question, will we ever wear suits again after COVID? I'm sincerely hoping sweatpants don't become the thing, but I think we're going to see less suits, and that's probably a good thing. All right, more importantly, let's talk about securing the connected home. Well, the connected home, of course, is more connected now than ever before. I read recently, I think in Crunchbase, that the average year of founding for companies in the smart home sector was 2009. So we've had a little over a decade now, and we've seen smart home adoption expand at a steady clip over this past decade. Currently, about 20 to 30% of US broadband households own one or more of a core list of smart home devices. This list is traditional home automation devices like lights, locks, and thermostats. More broadly, when we ask consumers, do you just own any connected device that can be remotely accessed, monitored, or controlled with a smartphone, tablet, computer, smart speaker? About 38% own anything connected. Now, at mid-year 2020, these first 2 metrics have pretty much stayed flat for the year. Of course, we're facing COVID, we're facing economic downturn. We're optimistic that Q4 we'll see a lot of recovery. There's already a lot of discounting going on at retail and other forces that we hope will help the year finish strong. Now, when it comes to smart speakers, at the end of 2019, 41% of households reported owning a speaker. That number has actually increased in the first half of 2020 and now sits at about 45% owning one or more smart speakers or smart displays. Of course, we know that these have become a critical interface and have made the home control experience a lot easier. Of course, security systems and home control systems have for some time been a route to a unified experience for consumers. And so at the end of 2019, we saw that the installed base of households having a security system was at 33%. There was a substantial jump in 2019. Now, in mid-year 2020, that number probably sits more around 30 to 32%. Again, we'll see what happens by the end of the year. Home control systems likewise saw a big jump in 2019, up to 18%, although generally home control systems have lagged in adoption behind all of the other endpoint solutions that consumers are buying. Of course, it's a great news for the state of the industry and for adoption in general, but of course, it makes securing the connected home vastly more complicated as each of these devices and systems represents a new threat surface for the home network. Said another way, the average number of devices across U.S. broadband households today is almost 12 devices. This would include over 70 different devices specifically that Parks Associates surveys in consumer electronics devices, in specific smart home devices, and in connected health devices. We expect this number to grow to closer to 20 by 2025. Of course, even today, there are many superpower user households that could have 20 or more devices. Now, when we ask consumers about their concern for a variety of security and privacy issues, perhaps it's not surprising that identity theft leads as the top concern among consumers. 54% of those surveyed cite that they have a concern about identity theft. Of course, identity theft represents kind of the greatest level of potential loss that consumers may face, either financially, in personal information, or in just inconvenience. Following behind that, 41% cite concerns about virus or spyware infection. This is probably the issue that consumers are most familiar with from past experiences. And then an equal number of consumers are concerned about hackers gaining access to their devices. We have seen that level of concern growing over recent years. Certainly it's fueled by headlines about data breaches and their own experiences with ransomware, with malicious software. Now, when we ask consumers more generally about their level of concern for securing devices in the home, nearly 80% of consumers express some level of concern for the connected devices that are in their home today. Now, we also know that with ownership of more devices, this concern actually increases. So where those households that we call newbies owning only one or two smart home devices have a level of concern at about 58% are concerned at some level, this rises to 72% among households that own 10 or more devices. So we've seen this being very consistent over the last number of years, that experience with these devices, in fact, does not mitigate concern, and in fact, it elevates concern as consumers feel increasingly vulnerable with more devices in the home. Now, shifting from concern to purchase impact, we find that data security is in the top 3 purchasing considerations, so that 29% of consumers report that when they're making a purchase consideration, this is among owners and those intending to purchase in the next year, that it's important that they buy a brand known for data privacy and security. So clearly, known equals brand reputation. And when you think about it, data privacy and security claims by manufacturers tend to be relatively similar. And so there's an opportunity here that manufacturers can truly make data security and privacy a core brand attribute. Now, similarly, when we think about purchase inhibitors among those who don't own any devices and don't intend to purchase any, once again, data privacy and security concerns rank among the top 3 barriers or purchase inhibitors. So that those who don't own or intend to buy one cite that they have data privacy and security concerns about having these smart devices in their home. Again, we've seen this percentage growing over the last few years. Obviously, among those who own and intend to buy, even though they have a level of concern, many of them buy anyway, but there's still a great deal of friction in the marketplace around data privacy and security. And certainly as we seek to expand into the mass market, we know that among mass market kinds of buyers, the early majority and late majority, this becomes a key sticking point that has to be addressed to drive the market forward. Now, when we ask consumers about what actions they actually take to protect themselves, and we present them with a variety of options, everything is from as simple as turning off or unplugging devices to choosing a router or gateway with strong security software, or using a firewall device or other strategy. We find that 40% of consumers don't take any of these actions whatsoever to protect themselves. So this task of securing the connected home is challenged by a customer base that's largely uninformed about how home networking functions. And so in the absence of security standards, some consumers are easily attracted to lower cost, minimally viable products from vendors with cheap, often open source solutions designed for a quick one-off sale. We know that there's this ongoing tension between ease of setup and security configuration, which would strengthen security, such as not using default passwords or enabling two-factor authentication. And so we know that many consumers typically take the path of least resistance. And so it really is incumbent on manufacturers and service providers to think about how they can automate many of these security functions, automate updates, and do as much as possible for consumers, knowing that consumers may very well not even take the steps available to protect themselves. Now, as we shift into interest level among consumers about various data security services, we find that among all U.S. broadband households, there is in fact a strong interest in a wide variety of data privacy and security services. A service that protects your devices from viruses and spyware. TOPS generates the highest level of interest among over 2/3 of consumers. Again, what leads probably is also that which consumers are most familiar with. Identity theft follows closely, along with solutions that protect personal privacy when using the internet, such as VPN or other online browsing protections and controls. Topping out the top 5, preventing unauthorized access to the home network and connected devices, or protecting you from data theft on the home network. Now, this picture is relatively complicated, though, because, for instance, where 63% of consumers are interested in preventing identity theft, we know that only 19% actually use an identity theft solution. And similarly, where 60% of consumers are interested in kind of network security, only 16% of those households actually report utilizing some kind of preventative solution. So the gap between interest and adoption certainly suggests that there are a number of other factors that influence adoption, such as the cost of services, perceptions of the convenience of using a service, or how it might be inconvenient in creating friction in the way they want to use their devices or use the internet. And so it certainly indicates that there's still a strong need for consumer education. Consumers likely have a deficit of knowledge, and especially as these solutions become more and more sophisticated, more and more automated, more and more convenient, the consumers need to understand how today's solutions may provide a much better user experience and simpler user experience than some solutions did in the past. Again, as we saw with interest among households owning more and more devices, or as we saw with concern, so do households owning more devices generate higher levels of interest for all types of these data security and privacy solutions. So again, that superpower users, those owning 10 or more devices, generate higher interest in all kinds of data security and privacy solutions compared to those who only own 1 or 2 devices. Finally, you may recall that earlier, one of the charts I showed earlier showed that among those actions taken by consumers to protect their data security and privacy, one of the most commonly chosen by about 24% of households was to choose a router that had specifically had data security and privacy features. And so when we go further in that question, we ask consumers about their level of interest in a variety of router features, not just security, but other features such as, improved Wi-Fi coverage, which we know is a very serious pain point for consumers, or optimizations for specific uses, or mesh networking, or other things. We find that consumers have the highest level of interest in security and privacy features, such as protection built into the router for malware or hacking, or limiting or prohibiting outside access to personal information in my home. So today's shoppers, in looking at new hardware, whether they're buying at retail or they're buying through a service provider or other channel, many of them are very, very interested that these kinds of cybersecurity solutions be integrated by software agents or other techniques. And it also drives a lot of conversation today around partnership alignment among the various players required to bring these services to market, such as the manufacturer and service provider who's selling the broadband service, as well as the security software provider. And in today's panel, we'll talk a little bit more about what some of these partnerships look like. So just to summarize kind of this analyst take on the sector, certainly when we look at consumer levels of concern, their level of adoption, their level of the impact of security and privacy on their purchasing behavior and on their interest, we see that these issues continue to loom very, very large for consumers. And there's no reason to believe that importance of this topic is going to subside. In fact, it's only becoming more and more urgent with every passing day. So with that, we're going to transition into our Visionary Insight presentation today, where we talk about innovation at scale, consumer data security, and privacy protection. I'm very pleased to introduce Marcio Aviles to you. He is the Senior VP of Business Development at Cujo AI. Marcio has been with us on a number of occasions, and we're thrilled to welcome him back today. He has over 21 years of experience in communication, cloud-based services, and enterprise services. And in the most recent years, he has been leading the charge for Cujo AI and fostering relationships with service providers and OEMs globally. So hang with us just for a minute as we bring Marcio's video feed in, and we'll be back with you in just a moment. All right, welcome back. We're thrilled Marcio's ready to go. Let me remind our audience to get any questions in for Marcio in the questions tab now, and we'll make sure to reserve a few minutes towards the end. But welcome, Mario. Glad to have you join us today.
Morning to some of you, and probably good afternoon to most of you. It's a pleasure to be back here. Excited to talk about this topic. It's been one that's been near and dear to my heart for the last few years. I wanted to start with a little bit of truth in advertising. We at Cujo believe in truth in advertising. So I figured I'd dress like I appear in the picture. So it's not like I've got a lot of things outside the home these days. So all the clothes are clean and ready to go, dressed in the closet. So a little bit of truth in advertising there. We also believe in under-promising and over-delivering. So hopefully I look better today than I did when they took those pictures. It's amazing what being at home for a few months will do to your health instead of living in hotels and eating at restaurants and drinking with friends. So let me go ahead and jump into the presentation. As Brad said, that we are going to absolutely answer questions. I'm not going to take a ton of time going through this. I think we've got some points we want to make and some information we want to share with you around what's going on in the market, but we'll leave plenty of time at the end to answer your questions. So please go ahead and put those into the question tab, and Brad will share them with me. So we at Cujo have recently did some surveys, and this was in support of our launch of a product that we called Incognito, which is our privacy service. And a lot of what we found, even though the survey was focused more on the privacy aspect and less on the security aspect, you'll see aligns with what Brad was kind of outlining for us. But we surveyed about 4,500 consumers, and the overwhelming response was that almost 3/4 of them are getting more concerned about online tracking and privacy threats. And as you'll see, most of them don't think about this the same way we do, where we look at this from a technology stack perspective or from a solution perspective. Consumers tend to look at this a lot more holistically. The survey covered a broad range of topics around known threats and ways to fight them, diverse opinion, we got a lot of opinions around tracking, and actually quite a bit of diversity of opinions there. And then we kind of try to drive into responsibility allocation, like who's responsible for helping consumers address this. The two slides that I want to show you are just kind of highlights from that survey. When we ask customers, what concerns them the most, and this is not at all divergent from what Brad was talking about. We asked it specifically as it related to privacy, but you see, there's a multitude of things that kind of start clearing the bar in terms of being things that people actually care about. And the reality is most consumers tend to conflate these concepts of privacy, security, vulnerability to hackers, data privacy, personal information, and even things like parental controls, things around managing what kind of content can be accessed by certain people. In consumers' minds, these things kind of all fall in the same bucket, which is challenging for the industry that looks at things from a solution perspective, but does present some opportunities if you can actually put together something that meaningfully improves people's lives across those dimensions. The other question that we asked is, and this was really interesting to us, we said, look, who should be responsible for this? I mean, you guys are concerned as a customer, as a consumer, about these things happening. As Brad mentioned, a lot of people are low information about this stuff. They don't really understand the dynamics of the networking. They don't really understand where the risks and the threats are, but they know they're there. And so who should be responsible, or who would you trust to some extent to provide you solutions, which is, I think, implicit in the way the question was asked. And the reality is, I think increasingly consumers are starting to rely on their ISPs to ensure some minimal level of protection. They also trust other entities, starting with, I think when you say websites, I think consumers would generally, throw Google and Facebook into that category. But they think about websites, they think about governments, and they think about device manufacturers, all within kind of a range of, hey, these are people who can actually make an impact on this. But surprisingly, from the survey we did, internet service providers seem to be somebody that customers are starting to rely on for this protection. The real question here is, how prepared are service providers to actually capitalize on this potential latent demand and this opportunity in the consumer space? And we think the answer is the time is now, and the technology's here to be able to do this. As Brad mentioned, I've been coming to Parks Connections this is I think my 5th year in a row, with a couple of different companies, the last 3 years with Kudra. And when I first showed up at Parks, we were talking about leveraging the router in the home as a kind of an anchor point to collect data, and also enable services that would put ISPs and carriers in a position to start addressing these security, privacy, content access controls issues, and do it on a holistic level across all the devices in the home. Now, for the last couple of years, we've talked about this. There's been a lot of skepticism to some extent. Hey, can you really do this? Is this really feasible? There's a lot of different routers out there. I mean, these networks are massive. Can you scale a service to that level to actually enable an operator to make this a reality in the consumer market? And the answer 3 years later is a resounding yes. We have launched our services with our carrier partners in over 25 million households. And we've got close to, actually, I think we're just above 700 million devices under management. And we have 7 major network operators, both in the cable and the telco sector, live here in North America. Furthermore, we've got 10 NSPs in Europe that we've got signed up under contract. And if you add up all the countries that they operate in, we've got another 13 countries, 3 of which are going to get launched, actually 4 of which are going to get launched in 2021. We're working on those right now. So the net of it is there is an opportunity for carriers to provide a service that addresses everything from security to privacy to parental controls. They can leverage their infrastructure to do it, and it is scalable and it is supportable, and it's something that you can do right now, which is not something, it was more of an idea and an aspiration 3 years ago, but through a lot of investment and hard work and cooperation from our customers, we've actually managed to scale this. So why would you say, this privacy thing does present an opportunity, but it does present some challenges for carriers as well. Because what's happening across the industry is you see that carriers are not the only ones who are picking up on consumers' interest with regards to privacy. There's been quite a few technology, I call them events, where new technologies that are all designed to improve consumer privacy are starting to get rolled out and built into devices like your smartphones, some of your OSs. There's 3 of them specifically that are on our radar. DNS encryption, that's been around for a while. Whether you're doing it during DNS encryption over HTTPS or DNS encryption over TLS. Most recently, Apple made a pretty big splash with their private Wi-Fi, where they have the ability to randomize the MAC address of the device every time it connects to the network. That's not how they've configured it immediately or initially as a default configuration, but they have the ability to do it every time the device connects to a network. And then we're starting to see some real movement on what's called encrypted hello, which would be, the technical term is encrypted SNI. And the reality is all 3 of those things actually have pretty significant impacts, both to the consumer benefits, right? But also to network operators. And I'm going to focus on one because it's a little bit of a case study and it's a recent one. It's probably relevant to everybody. But what Apple did is something that Android, excuse me, Android and Windows had already done. So what you have is kind of this troika of OSs on devices already had the capability to do this, but Apple's default configuration started randomizing the MAC address or hiding the MAC address of the device on its first connection to a new SSID. And that is causing problems, to say the least, for carriers, because most carriers relied on that MAC address as a way to uniquely identify devices that are connected to the router. Many carriers didn't actually have a capability of getting a ton of information off the router, but that is one piece of information they were able to do to gather from their routers, even the legacy routers, is understand the MAC address of the devices. And even if they couldn't tell exactly what that device was based on that MAC address, because it's certainly not definitive, they could at least use it as a unique identifier, and they could use it as an anchor to apply policy to devices. Well, what happens when you start hiding that MAC address or you start randomizing it is that you create duplicates in the system, and all of a sudden, something that you thought was a unique identifier that wasn't going to change, was immutable, is becoming more dynamic, with the possibility of becoming even more dynamic in the future. So the impact is there are many NSPs, that network service providers, who have invested quite a bit in help desk technology to understand how devices are connecting to Wi-Fi, looking at trends, tools that would enable their customer service reps to help their customers when they have Wi-Fi issues. And all of these things kind of rely on this MAC address. And as that MAC address gets randomized, these devices, you get duplicate devices in the system, you lose history, and there's a bunch of things that potentially break and are pretty significant. They can impact these investments in customer service, but they can also impact, policies or access policies or quality of service policies that are tied to a device type. If you can't tell what that device is. And the reality is Apple turned this service on middle of September, and they started randomizing the MAC addresses of all of their iOS devices. Works on watches, works on tablets, works on the phones, obviously. And here's the little bit of the case study. Our customers came to us and said, hey, we think this is a problem. We need you guys to come up with a solution. Because we already had a solution where we had an agent on the router, we were collecting data, and we had the capability, and one of our core competencies is AI and machine learning. We were able to build models to look at these devices and not only look at things like what other people would typically limit the universe of unique identifiers to, so the MAC address, the host name, but looking also at other things, look at behavior patterns on the network to say, hey, even if you change the device, even if you change the MAC address of the device, you can actually understand still what it is, even if the host name has changed, even if the MAC address has changed, by looking at the behavior of the device. So we built a model in very short order, and we deployed it across 5 carriers, and will soon be here across 7 carriers this year that would deduplicate the services. And it's kind of a big deal. We're seeing somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 million devices that get duplicated, and and it looks like 1% of the population on every single day will get a randomized MAC address. Now, this happens as people update, either buy devices with iOS 14, or they upgrade the devices that can upgrade operating systems to iOS 14. So it's something that is going to increase over time. Now, the risk to carriers with this is that if you don't have a solution for this in the long term, you're kind of at the mercy of the industry and what they decide the default policy is. Today, the default policy is you only randomize, at least for Apple, you only randomize the MAC address the first time it connects to a new SSID. So carriers that have 2 different SSIDs in the home, one for 2.4 and one for 5 gigahertz, are probably going to have a little bit bigger problem than those that have a single SSID. But even in that scenario, you get the device duplicated. However, the ability of the operating systems that are out in the market today is they could actually change that MAC address every single time a device reconnects to an SSID, which would even exacerbate the problem even more. So that's why they cared about this, and that's why they asked us to work on a solution for the problem, right? So how is it going? So we've had this in the market for close to about a couple months now. And what we're seeing is that we were able to deduplicate about 80% of the devices in 5 minutes. And once you get up to an hour, we got about 99% of the devices deduplicated with very, very few false positives. We're working on adding some more data collection to the agent on a router, which would allow us to then identify more devices and deduplicate them sooner. So we're looking to both increase the level of deduplication at 5 minutes and increase that from 80% to over 90%, and also decrease the false positives by being able to collect other markers. So, and this is all part of our core device identification service, which is really the fundamental it's the baseline service on which we've built security, privacy, app and content control. So what's happening in the market though? So the market is starting to react to these customers' interest in privacy and having their privacy security improved. And what we're seeing is throughout the world, not just here in the US, we're seeing this as well as in Canada and in Europe, that network service providers are realizing that privacy and security are not as much a how do I say this? They're not as much as an add-on value-added service, and they're becoming more and more an attribute of the broadband service. So you see what Comcast and Cox have done here in the US, and we're talking to customers in Canada and in Europe that are thinking about it the same way. But what people are starting to coalesce on is a strategy where if you have an advanced gateway, a more capable gateway in home, you can leverage that gateway to drive your ARPU up, either through a gateway rental or increasing what you charge for the brand broadband service, and justify that by adding new features like security, privacy, content and application access control, and things like that. And that's the strategy that we've seen Comcast adopt here in the US. Not talking out of school here, all you have to do is look at their offerings that they have in the market, and you understand that security is now, it comes with service. It's not an opt-in. And the same thing for Cox. And we're seeing other carriers in Europe that have adopted the same strategy that haven't launched yet. So I can't talk about it in any kind of detail, but it's a real trend. And where you see things happening like, for example, Shaw has initially decided to launch this as a value-added service, but my suspicion, and this is no insight or not through any conversations with anybody specifically at Cox, but I see this, both in some places here in North America, some places in South America, and throughout Europe, where carriers historically have underinvested in that router that they put at the edge of their network. And in order for them to be able to offer some of these upgraded services, especially when you get into application identification and application access control, it really does require that you get to routers that are more capable, have more memory, have better CPUs. So some of these services may be tied to a hardware refresh cycle. And what we're seeing is kind of a step function where if you can't deploy it to the full base, it doesn't always make sense for you to go into an opt-out model. So they choose initially to launch with an opt-in model, but with the option of moving to an opt-out model once they have their hardware refresh really locked and loaded, and they're actually trying to move people off of old platforms onto newer platforms. So, I mean, the reality is it is happening in the market. What's the challenge though, right? Doing stuff like this in a carrier is hard. These networks are complex, so you really have to start thinking about what are the things you need to have in place so that you can try to do some of this innovation without disrupting your services or creating an unnecessary number of incremental inbound calls with customers asking questions or having issues with the service. So how do you do this? And what we see is that some of these telcos started here in North America, but we're starting to see it in Europe. We're starting to see some elements kind of come into place that allow carriers to take advantage of platform services like the one that we offer to really, really enable innovation at scale. We're seeing RDK adoption across Europe. What RDK does for most of these carriers is it gives them some leverage over their hardware manufacturers by somewhat commoditizing the hardware underneath the middleware and standardizing on a set of middleware. But most importantly, it adds a lot of capabilities in terms of data collection and communication back and forth from the router to the network. We've said at other forums that kind of for RDK, the superpower for RDK is data. And that's really what the second point is about. With this efficient data collection and the ability to get it up to the cloud, it means you're actually able to do a lot more stuff to help consumers address their concerns in this privacy space. And if you combine that with platforms like the one that we're offering to customers, we're essentially an AI sandbox where we've got certain services and models that we've built that we can deploy at scale, but they're extendable, right? So if we have another problem, ESNI is a perfect example. We're starting to see a lot of movement on this, and this is something we've already filed patents on. And if it becomes a reality, we've got some time here to take that innovation and actually productize it and make available to our carriers in a form that they can actually scale it. And that's really what's required to get to innovation at scale. So it's a big opportunity. But it's not necessarily an easy one for carriers to take advantage of. There's some investment that they need to do to kind of put themselves on a position where they can actually deploy these services. But the good news, there are solutions like the one that we offer where once you get kind of the base infrastructure upgraded, the ability to add services and iterate services and deliver new innovative services, it comes at a much lower price in terms of timescales. So, it's I think it's an opportunity. I think it'll reshape the way carriers talk about their broadband services going forward, and it's an opportunity, but it's not going to come easy to some of them. Some of them have underinvested in their infrastructure, but there are enough of them that have realized the opportunity that you're starting to see the investments in both the router side of the network as well as the system side and some of the process things that you need to have in place at a carrier to support customers once you offer these services. You're starting to see that really ramp up. So that's what I had, Brad. I don't know if we've got any questions we wanted to jump into.
Sure. Yeah, Marcio. So I have to say, you look good, and you sound as good as you look. So there you go.
Thank you.
Listen, we need to stay on schedule this morning, and so I'm going to have to ask our audience to go ahead and submit your questions, and we'll make sure that the Cujo team gets them, and we'll respond to those. There's also a couple of extra polling questions in there that we would love to hear from you, and we'll share results later. But we've kind of rolled past our time here. So Marcio, again, thank you very, very much for joining us. Thanks for illuminating the MAC address problem. I think it just exemplifies how much cloud-based solutions that are responsive and adaptive, are just really critical in this new era. So thanks again for joining us today. We appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Marcio. All right, next up, we're going to bring our panel discussion in today where we'll be talking a little bit further about mitigating security and privacy risks in the home. Bear with us just a minute as we bring our panel in, and then we'll dive right in with our introductions. Great. Okay, so as we know, there are a variety of risks that are threatening data security and privacy in the home, whether we're talking about the familiar problems of viruses, malware, ransomware. We're talking about botnets. We're talking about phishing attempts. We're talking about account takeovers and device takeovers. It really has become a veritable whack-a-mole that is relentless. And so we're excited to learn from our panelists today about how various solution providers are addressing these kinds of risks. Now, we also have a polling question for our audience that I want to call your attention to. And so if you look in your right tab, you'll see this question: which area of security and privacy risk is the most pressing concern to you today? So please weigh in on that polling question. We're going to go to our introductions, and then we'll come back and see the results of that question from you. All right, so let me introduce our panelists today. First of all, meet David Henry. David is the Senior VP of Connected Home for Netgear. Welcome, David.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Tell us a little bit about Netgear and your perspective on this topic.
Sure. So I've been with Netgear for about 16 years, and we're just approaching our 25th year of being in business. And for those who are not aware, we're the leading provider of, premium home networking solutions, also for the small business. We've got over 12 million registered customers, and that number is obviously increasing in the last year with all of the folks upgrading their networks for kind of the work from home solution. That this topic is very timely for us. In many years past, we were competing with your traditional networking OEMs. Today, we're competing with two of the largest ad platforms in the world for home networking, and so concerns about data privacy and data security are definitely top of mind for our customers, and it kind of echoes some of the research that you shared earlier. So looking forward to participating on the panel and hearing what folks have to say and some of the questions.
Great, David. Thanks for joining us. Next, I want you to meet Joe Johnson of Windstream. Joe is the VP of Product Development and Management. So welcome, Joe.
Well, thank you for having me, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, no matter where you're at. My name is Joe Johnson, and I'm responsible for both our consumer and business product development and product management here at Kinetic by Windstream. And I am super excited to discuss security and the home. And as Marcio mentioned, 65.1% of consumers are looking towards their internet service provider for security and to help them secure their connections and their digital lifestyle. And with that being said, we recognized that opportunity in late 2018, and in late 2019, we introduced Kinetic Secure, which is our gateway security product. And it's a fusion of a partnership between our gateway provider ActionTech and F-Secure and Windstream. And so we are super excited to talk about that and look forward to the panel. Thank you for having me.
Great, Joe. Welcome. We also are pleased to have Sharon Mirsky joining us. Sharon is co-founder and CEO of FireDome. Welcome, Sharon. Sharon, are you on mute? Could you check your mute? And we're not hearing you. All right, let us work on it from our end just for a second. It might be your audio input. Sharon, you might check that as well. Okay, we're still not hearing you. Let me move on and introduce our next speaker, and Sharon, we'll come back to you and see if we can get it worked out. All right, we also have joining us today from F-Secure, Antero Norquio. Antero is VP of Solution Management for the Consumer Security Business Unit of F-Secure. Welcome, Antero.
Thank you. Good morning, good evening, everyone. Great to be here. And yeah, really interesting topics and presentation from both Brad and Marcio. We definitely see the same kind of statistics when we look into our consumer surveys and feedback from the service providers that we work across the globe. So F-Secure is a company focusing on cybersecurity products, both for consumers and for enterprise customers. And our primary focus is that we work together with the service providers, that we are a service provider first company, really making sure that we protect the consumers wherever they are, whether they are at home, on the move, using public Wi-Fi. And that's the way we build, our portfolio, that we combine, for example, router-based security, endpoint, cloud monitoring and identity protection, network security, all into one seamless user experience for the consumer. But of course, at the same time, the really critical part is that how do you launch all of these different services? So we also provide a lot of services beyond technology, like pre-launch planning, that what are the value propositions all about, what should be the key proposition, the messaging, what kind of marketing campaign should you run, what kind of analytics and data insights you want to generate as part of the whole service lifecycle, and then all the way up to upselling, cross-selling, churn prediction, and so forth. And I think that's a really important aspect to looking at security and privacy offering, that you have these great solutions coming out, and then at the same time, how do you build a consumer-friendly user proposition, whether it's a value-added service, whether it's bundled into the broadband services, a lot of different ways how to capture the value with the cybersecurity services with consumers.
Great, Antero, thank you so much for that introduction. Now let me go back and see if we can pull Sharon back in. Hi, Sharon.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me now?
Lovely. We can hear you. Great.
Great. Sure. So first of all, thank you for having me. Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. I'm the co-founder and COO at FireDome. FireDome is an IoT privacy, security, and marketing insights platform. We work with leading IoT device manufacturers to differentiate them and allow them to capture market share and leverage consumers' willingness to pay by resolving top privacy and security concerns of consumers. And based on what you shared, Brad, this is definitely top of mind and a huge decision-making factor for consumers today when they need to choose out of the many choices that they have on the shelves. We offer both the continuous cyber protection and actionable marketing insights. We enable brands to both mitigate the consumer risk by advanced real-time proactive cyber protection, and then reinforce the value of the protection at the point of sale and post-sale through our platform. The platform is designed for product managers to gain trust and loyalty of shoppers and users and support any type of IoT device, may it be RTOS, Linux, Android, etc. And we have both agent and cloud-only offerings. We're a venture-backed company with offices in New York City, Tel Aviv, and Minsk, even though we're all working from around the world now, and it doesn't really matter where we are, with cyber and embedded experts from Israel's top cybersecurity units. We have won CES Privacy and Security Award this year, as well as top 50 startups in New York City, and we're growing rapidly. We're proud partners of ALAN Networks, UL, Microsoft Azure, Lenovo, and we're happy to work with any IoT manufacturer that understands the huge opportunity in cybersecurity and privacy. Looking forward to an interesting conversation.
Sure. All right. So great for that. Thank you for that introduction, Sharon. Okay, let's quickly turn our attention to the poll question. We ask our audience to weigh in during those introductions. So when we're asking this particular audience about their security and privacy risk and the most pressing concern to them today, I certainly see this audience is thinking a lot about the home network. So a third of you said that your most pressing concern is network security. Kind of equal numbers cite private information made public or hackers gaining access to devices. And then finally, identity theft is the least pressing concern. So you listeners are not the typical consumer today, but certainly I think a lot of us appreciate how much network security has risen to the top, specifically when we're talking about securing the connected home. There's another poll question in the tab. We'll come back to that in just a minute. But let's dive into our conversation. So Joe, I want to start with you. A lot of our questions begin with the COVID context that we're all living through. And one of the things we know from our consumer data, and of course, many of you know from a variety of sources, is that this crisis has caused a dramatic uptick in home network usage, in connected device purchasing, and consequently data security and privacy threats. What security issues have been illuminated or exacerbated due to the pandemic from your perspective?
Well, that's a great question. Thank you for that. I mean, we see, number one, streaming going through the roof. I mean, Nielsen said streaming's up 85% around the globe because of all the stay-at-home orders. So along with that, we have working from home. There's a lot more traffic on the data networks. And then additionally, we have our children that are schooling from home. We have children throughout the day that may not be schooling from home and playing online video games. And so, but nonetheless, I think, there's more people in the home throughout the day. And regardless of how long the COVID measures are in place, because we see certain countries as well as certain states here in the U.S. starting to reintroduce some of the more stringent measures to control this COVID-19. With that, what we've seen is this is a behavioral, psychological thing. When we go to work, we're fairly protected. We scan in and we scan out. When our children go to school, they're extremely well protected, right? And so, but now that we're in our homes, we have a sense of security, and this might be if you don't have a security system, you might go out and purchase some IoT cameras. You might purchase a DIY security platform or security system. And so and as your data indicated at the opening, many of these sectors across the board are on the increase. But at the same time, consumers may not be purchasing the kind of like the top of the line, more measured and more protected devices, and they might be going to online and just purchasing a camera, etc. And many of these types of connected devices, their serial numbers and their generic passwords are already exposed on lists across the darker web, giving potential nefarious actors potential access into your system. So I think as more and more consumers are deploying these technologies to feel safe, to feel protected around their physical lifestyle, then I think that exposes a risk. Just inherently from the data perspective, I think the increased traffic is also drawing a lot more attention to our use of our data connections. Hence the reason why our Kinetic Secure platform that we introduced is a gateway level security product with F-Secure and our gateway level provider to prevent a lot of that malware, a lot of that phishing alerts, increased endpoint security. So that way we can block a lot of that nefarious traffic trying to access anything that sits behind the gateway. So that would include any Wi-Fi enabled device or any device that's connected, say, through NFC, through a primary access point that is connected through Wi-Fi. So we can really block a majority of that traffic off.
Yeah, that's great. So we're going to come back to the solution that's in market in just a minute, but I want to give the others a chance to weigh in here. What else are some of the rest of you seeing as a result of the COVID crisis?
I can talk a little bit about it. Again, this is David. So, we are seeing a blurring of lines between when you're at home and when you're at work. And when I mean at work for kids, that could be schooling, and when you're playing and when you're working are different blocks throughout the day. It's not 8 to 5 I'm working and afterwards I'm not, and same thing for the kids. We're also seeing shared devices. I mean, some of us we live in a bubble where everyone in the home, including the kids, have their own computer, their own phone, their own Chromebook for school. Well, in many homes around the country, we're sharing devices. And so when you have shared devices between a family, some for work, some for play, and then you start thinking about just the sheer amount of usage and then the sensitivity of data. I mean, we're getting healthcare from home now. So people are taking very, very private conversations with their doctors, taking pictures of symptoms and sending them to the doctors. So I'd say just the overall amount of usage on shared networks, shared devices, and the sensitivity of data has really increased in the last 6 to 9 months. And that of course, that increases the risk. And so, a lot of companies, ISPs, networking manufacturers really have to raise the bar to make sure we're providing solutions for our customers to protect them from those things, because I think it's only going to get more and more challenging as we get dependent on the network for all these things in the home.
And maybe one thing
that is very interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah, maybe one thing to add to what David was saying is that we actually are seeing that happening for example, in Finland. Actually, we had last Friday one of the healthcare organizations got breached, because of course nowadays those type of organizations are, I don't want to call it an easy target, but those guys are 150% maxed with all these COVID issues left and right. So clearly, it's a good time for the bad actors to go after those type of companies. But the additional angle comes from the fact that nowadays you don't just do ransomware type of an attack against a healthcare organization. You actually steal the information, and then you start to send out the ransomware, the ransom claims for the actual people who got their healthcare records, or in this case, it was actually your mental health type of a discussion with your therapist. So very detailed information got leaked into the internet by roughly 20,000, 30,000 people had all the information going out there in the wild, plus getting ransom claims at the same time. So that just shows that we need to think about security very, very widely. Also from like the cloud services perspective, is my data being breached and used by the bad actors? And then provide also completely new types of services for the consumers. So you can imagine the kind of stress and confusion and worry what those consumers might have. That how do I then take the things under control? What they want to call it psychological help, but really helping consumers to take grip of these type of situations.
I think another interesting
Great. Yeah,
point.
Go ahead, Sharon.
Thank you. Another interesting point is that if before IT
I'm
managers,
not really here, Sharon.
this is annoying. Can you hear me? No?
Yes. Yes, I can hear you.
Can you hear me now? Hello? No?
Yeah, you're good.
Yes,
We can hear you.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Good. Another hiccup, but we'll make it work eventually. Keeping it interesting for everyone. Okay, so another interesting problem is that if before IT managers needed to deal with, the IT and the OT of their organization, now all of a sudden, it's not just people coming to the office with their wearable devices or their mobile devices, but they are connecting to the VPN from their homes, where they have, as Brad mentioned, 12 other devices on average. That is basically another attack surface for hackers. So it's much easier to get access to the OT and IT these days, that now that we're all working from home. So we see also organizations and carriers looking into all kinds of secure gateways, secure MiFi devices, so that they control better all these devices that are not secure, that are in people's homes. And that's a direct impact of COVID-19 for sure.
Great. Sharon, I want to stay with you just for a minute for another question, kind of shift the topic a little bit. At a general level, COVID has reminded all of us about the role of personal responsibility. Do we wear masks? Do we not? Do we social distance? Do we not? I raised the issue earlier in my presentation about consumer responsibility for data security. So what's your take about how manufacturers and other ecosystem partners should be thinking about consumer responsibility in the task of securing the connected home?
Okay. So I think it's an easy way out to put the responsibility on the consumers. The consumers, as we saw in all the stats you presented, consumers care greatly about security and privacy. But even when they can buy services to secure them, they don't do it. So as you said, 60% are interested in the security service, but less than 20 actually adopt. And I think this is something, that the data shows that consumers, and sorry for the background noise, this is New York, so ambulances here are, sorry about that. So the consumers have levels of concerns, 80%, as you said, 35% don't even buy IoT devices because they're afraid of cybersecurity and privacy and a hacker taking control of their identity or whatnot. So, but they don't have the right tools, they don't have the capability, and they don't do it. They just don't do it. So putting the responsibility on the consumers is not the right thing to do. The other way around it is actually to take this as an opportunity. Consumers are willing to pay more, sometimes even $40 for certain devices, for $40 or 40% even for A-rated device that is A-rated from security and cyber perspective. So this is actually an opportunity for the early adopters from the manufacturer perspective to actually gain and capitalize on this opportunity to differentiate against your other manufacturers before this will be mandatory by regulations.
I think, yeah, it's really helpful. I think to your point, there is an opportunity to embed security in hardware, and to do more and more of it for consumers. David, I want to come back to you. There's a lot of new technologies, whether it's AI, machine learning, blockchain. Talk a little bit about how some of these new technologies are helping us kind of win the war against hackers, and maybe just your assessment of how well are we doing, and then I'll let
Yeah.
others chime in.
Sure. Well, there's certainly a lot of bad news out there, so I will focus on some of the good news, and that is that consumer awareness, consumer concern is probably what's going to protect us the most, and that's definitely increasing. I think we saw that in some of the research that you presented earlier at the beginning of the presentation, that it's very high on the list. But was concerned is that I think I wrote 40% of people aren't doing anything about it. And it probably means they don't know what to do. There's no CIO or IT manager in the home to help consumers navigate cybersecurity and data privacy. So that's where technology comes into play. And that's where, companies like Netgear and my peers on this panel come into play, is that we have to figure out how we can make it very simple for someone who is just not an IT tech enthusiast to secure their homes and protect their data. So something we've done at Netgear is developed a service we call Armor. And our Armor is a cybersecurity service that does reside on the wireless router and protects devices on the network from cyber attacks, as well as providing them security protection when they leave the home. And so we provide what we call a vulnerability scan, where we'll scan all the devices on your network and present to you things that you can do to improve. So if you don't have an IT manager, we can be your IT manager for you to help you navigate that. We want to make it simple. If we don't make it simple, I'd imagine we're going to stay in the scenario where everyone's worried but doesn't know what to do, which sounds like something that's a recipe for disaster. Now, I think the other thing to consider is that consumer awareness amps up when there's something in the news, something scary in the news, but we're seeing it gradually increase. I mean, we were researching to introduce a VPN service for our customers, and we wondered, do they even know what VPN means? And in our surveys, we found out actually a lot more knew what a VPN was and were interested in it than we'd initially anticipated and than was in the past. Same things when we provided 2FA for our apps and our web properties for the first time, and several years ago, the adoption was very low. We left it as optional, but recently we've seen definitely an uptick in people adopting those tools. So the more we reinforce as an industry these concerns, the more the awareness gets out there, and turning on 2FA is, it's not something that's new. In fact, it's expected. So I think that's an effort that we all can take. On the Wi-Fi side, there's new technologies like Wi-Fi protected WPA3, which is the third generation of WPA. It's rolling out with the Wi-Fi 6 technology. It's obviously more secure and better encrypted than those in the past. And those will keep happening, innovating on. But I think the biggest improvement that we're going to see is not, and clearly there'll be technology, is not so much on the technology itself, but on just getting consumers aware that and make it easy for them to secure themselves.
Sure. Antero, I want you to weigh in here. What's your take on the latest technological advances and how effective we are today with the tools that we have?
No, we definitely are in a much better shape than we've been in the past. You can look at it from a device's perspective. Devices are getting much more secure. Browsers are getting much more secure. Traffic is getting encrypted, much more difficult to do man-in-the-middle type of attacks and so forth. But like we've been talking already, that only takes you so far. What we need to look into security as kind of 360. That in the past, security was more about the prevention part. Now, similar to enterprise-grade security, we need to look into detection and response elements as well. As we know nowadays, that nothing provides 100% protection. That might have devices connected to your home network that are vulnerable. That it's actually the cloud service that you use to manage your devices at home. I think the good example is that we see nowadays, every week there's an article that, hey, was Google just hacked because a Nest device has been compromised? However, when you typically drill down into the details, it's not the device itself that was compromised, but actually your cloud service was taken over by someone because of, for example, bad password hygiene, and then or there was a breach, and then you reused your passwords, and then that was the way in for the attacker to take over your home gadgets. So the cloud is one part that we need to look into. The other angle is that we need to apply much more AI to actually understand these differences in what's considered to be a normal traffic profile for a device, and then we can detect, hey, actually now there is a significant change happening in your home network for this specific device, and then you can take these preventive response actions like quarantining an infected device and providing clear guidance for the consumers. But going back to what I fully agree what David was saying, that we need to make this simple, and at the same time really add up the different kinds of platforms and standards being applied at the moment. That how do we actually make this available for every consumer? There's a lot of different, for example, container or virtualizing technologies now becoming mainstream, and deploying those on the CPE level really turns the CPE into be it a value-added services platform or a CPE that you can run different kinds of services on top. Really then helps provide protection for all the households and making security and privacy available for all the consumers. So I think that's another important aspect to look into when we talk about security and privacy. What are the protection features, but then equally how easily and how quickly we can deploy that across the service provider CPE base.
Great, Antero, thanks. And Joe, I'm going to come back to you in just a second, but we have a polling question that kind of teased the next part of our conversation up. So we're asking our audience today, and those of you who've weighed in already, thank you. Lost control of my slides here. The question is, though all players have a part, which can have the biggest impact on securing the connected consumer? And so your options were manufacturers, network providers, cybersecurity software, industry alliances, or regulators. So this is kind of in keeping with our prior poll question. 50% of you say that network providers are really in the best position to have the biggest impact. Another 31% of you say manufacturers. 1 in 5 cybersecurity software providers. None of you are putting industry alliances or regulators as a priority, and that's not too surprising. But certainly it points to the importance of a partnership alignment, especially for service providers. They're going to bring a solution to market. It often requires kind of multiple partner alignments. And so, Joe, I want to turn to you on this question because you shared with me a little bit about kind of what you had done strategically in bringing your Kinetic solution to market. But talk a little bit about partnership alignments and what's necessary and what you've learned in bringing a solution to market.
Thank you for the question. And so I'll be kind of precise in my answer. So we actually partnered with our gateway provider Action Tech, as well with F-Secure, which is a global security leader. And we recognized early on that we had a previous product that was an endpoint security product. And ultimately we felt, well, let's bring it to the gateway. Let's enable this security from a network traffic perspective to all of our consumers. And so we engaged in those discussions in late 2018, as I mentioned, and throughout the course of 2019, we actually worked with F-Secure to bring their software into the gateway. So we actually had a lot of software development over the course of the first 6 months of the year to make that happen. And then obviously we had to make sure that we tested it really well, because we can't have bad software out on our gateways. So we spent a lot of time really focused in on the testing mechanisms. And when I think about service providers, we completely agree that we are in that value chain, and we believe that customers are looking to us as the trusted technology partner. And I want to, for everyone watching, I want to point out that I kind of disagree with Marcio. Frankly, I don't think carriers should be giving away this this service for free. And so we actually have our product as a value-added service, and what we have seen is from our prior secure endpoint only security product to our gateway security product, inclusive of endpoint security, identity theft, we have seen a complete reversal. Prior, we had about 80% of adoption on packages $8.99 and below. But now that we have our gateway security product, 61% of all package being purchased are on plans $11.99 and above. And so we offer 3 strategic plans. And, so there is a meaningful ARPU growth here. And so I agree with Sharon that, consumers are willing to pay for security. And so it is a meaningful ARPU driver. It is a meaningful way to enhance the revenues from your broadband subscriptions. And, think about this. And an additional reason why we collaborated with F-Secure, with our gateway provider, is, although we did not intend and we did not foresee COVID, with telehealth and, as David mentioned, health services increasing significantly. In 2019, it was 11%. In 2020, it's 46% of households are utilizing these types of healthcare services. Healthcare is moving into the house. It is moving into connected devices. And these things need to be protected. The traffic itself needs to be protected. And so it was a development exercise. It took the better part of a year to deploy the combined solution. And now we're constantly iterating it and making significant improvements. But I will tell you this, invest in it. It is definitely worth it, because not only are you delivering security, not only are you delivering a value-added resource, this investment that we built around security also gave us the opportunity to reimagine our entire consumer interface as it relates to Wi-Fi management, security management, parental controls, and we have an industry-leading experience, right? That was rewarded by IoT World with the best IoT security deployment. And then we just won last week from Broadband World Forum, best solution from a service operator for consumer or business. And so we really doubled down on this to bring consumers an amazing simplified solution, because I agree with David as well. It has to be easy. And we've even seen with our own solution that opportunities to make improvements in how we deliver endpoint security after the gateway security is deployed within the home, right? And so it's helping us change and improve our own processes. And so it's quite meaningful, that partnership, because you can really reimagine your business through just this one thing.
If I may add,
Joe, thanks for your perspective. I'm hearing from my team that Marcio very much would like a rebuttal time. Maybe you guys could take that to Twitter. But I do want the other group to weigh in with this notion of business models and maybe segmentation strategies, whether it's a value add or it's a tiered offering or a premium bundle with premium support. What's the perspective some of the rest of you have had about this business model conversation, and maybe what works when and with what groups of people? Who wants to chime in?
Okay, well, maybe I can start. So we've been working with more than 200 carriers worldwide. And I would say that there's no silver bullet. There's no single answer. So we are seeing all different kinds of flavor, depending on what's the core strategy for the operator, what are the points of emphasis in the strategy. That is it about, building a completely new brand position, for example, being the most secure network in a given country. Would it be about, driving your top line, like Joe was talking about, driving, providing security as a value-added service? Is this more about actually securing your network, that you have less botnets running, you have less customer care calls? Are you actually planning to bundle security into your more higher tier broadband services? Maybe it's part of your fiber package included. Maybe it's a paid value-added service in your lower tier broadband speeds. So we see all these kinds of mixes around the globe. So I would say that it all starts from the operator's own strategy and their own points of emphasis. How would they like to monetize and capture value with their security and privacy solutions? So like Joe mentioned, yes, it definitely can drive top line. And there are, of course, multiple other ways you can capture value with it, or ideally combining these two.
I could add to that from the perspective of a device manufacturer. I mean, we definitely think that consumers will pay for this. We've seen it. At Netgear, we have several services we offer to consumers. We've got our parental controls service. We've got our cybersecurity service called Armor. We've got a kind of extended warranty type of service as well. But all in, we're over 350,000 subscribers on these services. People are paying us. So there is evidence that people will pay. Now, it's not, I talked about having over 12 million install base. It's not quite there, but pretty clearly customers will pay for it. Now, question is how much of it is going to be table stakes and how much of it is going to be an add-on? And I think that's going to be very dynamic. For us, it's going to be dependent on what our competition does. It's going to be dependent on what the ISPs do, obviously, because in many cases, people go into the store, to a Best Buy or Amazon, et cetera, to get something that is better than or different than their ISP can give them. And that's why they buy Netgear. If the ISP gateway was good enough, we wouldn't have a business. So although the ISP gateway is good enough for a lot of people, there are people who walk in the store to get something different. For those customers, we have to make sure that what's different can be performance, it can be security, it can be privacy, it can be value-added features, it could be gaming, it could be all sorts of things. But we've got to provide a cut above. We've explored with a couple of models. One of them is, bundle it into the price of the product. And the other is let people buy it a la carte after they purchase the product. I will say that you got to let the customer speak because we can all think about how to do it, and really it might vary by country, it might vary by product line. So from our premium products like our Orbi, which is $500 products, we can bundle it into there. And if you go to a Costco right now, you'll see our Armor bundled in. But maybe for some of our lower price products where people might be a little more price sensitive, we can't just layer in that cost of the service. They're going to have to buy it aftermarket. So it definitely will be a mixed bag. But I will tell you, as of today, it does look like consumers are willing to pay for this, to me.
So I'll add.
All right, David, left.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sharon.
So I'm happy that there is a wide agreement here that consumers are willing to pay more. And I think we can divide it into 3 buckets. First of all, we see from research, from what the other panelists have been saying here, that consumers are willing to pay more. There was just a consumer report that went out earlier this week talking about smart speakers, that people are willing to pay $40 more for secure smart speakers and even $50 more for security cameras. So the willingness to pay is there. Another opportunity, again, to gain revenues here is from the differentiation, to grow your market share, because there are a lot of options there on the shelf. And this is an opportunity, even if you don't add those dollars on top of your price, to gain in the market share. That a consumer will buy your product versus another product. And the other bucket is to capture on the consumers that currently do not buy IoT devices because they are afraid. And based on the research that Parks did, it's 35% and growing. So that's another bucket that manufacturers can actually gain money from this differentiation. I think one thing that we talked about before, and I would like to add, is about the partnerships. And we partnered with UL that have a new cybersecurity and privacy ranking. And that's very interesting because consumers today do not know what is better security, what is worse, what is best, right? It's really hard for them to understand if you say that you're secure, what does it mean? If the communication is encrypted, is that enough? Like most of them don't understand. They are afraid, they are willing to pay more, but they have no idea what is better or worse. And organizations and certifications and ability to externalize this value, and this is what we do at FireDome. We help manufacturers communicate with the consumers and at the point of sales and afterwards, those type of ranking systems, or those types of badges on the devices really help externalize the value and level the playing field in a way that every manufacturer that puts the right processes and the right security protocols and the right platforms and security solutions like FireDomes, this is an opportunity for the consumers to understand what is better and what is worse and actually pay more dollars for it.
Yeah, Sharon, that's a great segue into one of our audience questions. And I want to remind the audience you can still submit a question. But to your point about third-party cybersecurity certification and the UL program, someone asked, will we see the way they phrase this, cross-company adoption of an official rating scale describing how secure a particular device or router is? So, will we see standardization of security kind of from an industry perspective? Will we see more third-party certifications? I know we asked consumers last year, those 35% who indicate that this is a barrier to purchasing, then we asked them, to what degree would that concern be alleviated by a third-party cybersecurity certification? And about a third of them, about 11%, said that would alleviate their concern. So I'll ask all of you to chime in. Do you think that we'll go to a place where we have a more standardized rating of devices or services, or do you just think there's too much fragmentation in the market and it's just going to be left up to competitive factors?
Well, so I'll start. I can start real quick, or is that meant for Sharon?
You can start. I can follow. No worries.
Okay, no worries. I was just going to say that we have seen this education factor as well, and this is something that that we are actively working on and collaborating with our various sales organizations, because you're right, consumers do not understand these different levels of security and why it's important to them. So there is a level of education that we are embarking on to educate our customers around the different security threats, what we're doing at the solution level. How has the gateway protected the consumer? Because we intrinsically believe that you have to show the customers the value that these security services are providing for them. Like, when you go and you scan your endpoint and you see 3 blocks, 3 threats have been blocked, right? We need that type of, transparency and insight, and the data, frankly, to present back to the customers. So there's a huge education program. So I think from an ISP perspective, we have a set number of devices. So it's easy for us to standardize and look at our own data and the data that is going on to present back to the customer experience. So for us, we can kind of play a role in some of that standardization, but it's going to be reporting and education back to the end consumer. Sharon? Yeah,
thank you. So I agree, and I think it's too early to tell. We're in the early days, but I think again, organizations like UL and Intertek with their Cyber Assured, and there are a few others now. In Singapore, they have their own certification system that is now mandatory there. So I think eventually it will be like the Energy Star rating, and people will look for it. Maybe it won't be top one, but there will be a few. But definitely this is something needed, and we need to make it both simple for the manufacturers and the consumers to understand what they should do and what they can trust.
Well, that's interesting. You refer to Energy Star, which of course is a federal program, right? So it raises the question of regulatory activity, which the tech community is usually never fond of, right? We prefer market forces. But what are your thoughts about the role of regulatory activity, in helping standardize the industry, or whether standardization is even a goal? David, Antero, you have thoughts?
Sure. I mean, I think there's definitely a place for it. I mean, I look at and probably more on the data privacy than it is maybe in the security. But I think it helps create a level playing field between us and our competitors and folks in the ecosystem, so that we have to meet certain standards. Otherwise, we're going to incur more expense to meet them, and maybe others will not, and consumers might choose the less private or the less secure or whatever based on pricing. So I do think it helps to have kind of some regulatory input. I mean, I can think of like the California IoT security law that kind of enforced certain things on security, GDPR, of course, and more. The one thing I will say is that one of the challenges we see with the regulatory approach is that the folks who are drafting the laws may not be as knowledgeable on the nuance of how it might be implemented. So the laws are drafted, and the people who wrote them maybe didn't consider all these different corner cases, the definitions of these things. So when we're interpreting these laws, they don't make a lot of sense sometimes, and sometimes we spend more time and resources and money interpreting the laws than actually complying with the new laws. So I think yes, we support the regulation, but make it a little easier for us to understand. So put some techies on your more techies on your regulatory panels.
And if I may, sorry,
Andra in here just very quick. I know you have a GDPR perspective and an EU perspective, as well as North American. What are your thoughts on this topic?
No, I would fully echo what David was saying, that there are good things that come with regulation. I think, GDPR, even though it was a tough exercise for many companies, that was a good exercise, both from a consumer privacy perspective, but forced a lot of companies to actually look into how do they handle data within the company. And I think that was a good exercise. And on EU level, I know that there are discussions ongoing similar to California, that what would be good enough but still light enough regulation that you force the device manufacturers to have some basic things implemented, like you don't ship anything with default passwords. Your devices have firmware update capabilities built into it, that you are forced to look into this product and the service lifecycle, that what happens not just at launch, but what happens after 1 year, 2 year, 3 year type of time perspective. When you have cloud elements built into your service, you might have an app built into it. And if you only look into the next 12 months, we all know that that's not going to be very secure down the line. So I think having basic framework regulation in place is definitely a good thing. But I think we still have enough flexibility for the industries to define that, okay, how do we apply then the industry specifics on top?
Okay, great. Let me toss out one more audience question to you and ask for kind of brief responses, and then we'll have to wrap it up. But the question comes about who is better suited to provide privacy and identity protection services. And they raise the issue of, isn't the service provider in a little bit of conflict here? Would consumers believe the service provider that they will preserve their privacy? I know this has come up in VPNs offered by service providers. One of the number one reasons people use a VPN in the consumer level is to access content, that maybe they don't have rights to or something. So what are your thoughts about the service provider role, specifically, not so much security, but in providing privacy and identity protection services? And that's a toss-up. Anybody can weigh in.
Well, I guess the service
No one
provider.
else.
yeah.
So I guess the service provider needs to hop in here. I mean, privacy is so intrinsically aligned and important to each of us as consumers, right? Regarding, we work from home, we stream from home, our children are online. And so I think that, as a service provider, we got to do everything that we can to, from a traffic perspective, to follow the regulatory rules, right? And I think there's a lot of privacy rules that need to be passed as far as what third parties can do. And this is where when we start reporting back and insights, there's only certain things that we can see as a provider in order to triage and support our customers during the repair process. From the modems and the devices that are connected into the modems, so we can help triage service issues, any sort of Wi-Fi issues. But beyond that, that's where, we respect the privacy of our customers. And, I think we just need better, guidance. And what are the guardrails there? So of, third parties, because frankly, the likes of Apple and Google and all of these cloud companies, cloud native companies, have so much data on our customers already and us as people, right? So I think there needs to be stronger definition at the federal and state level, personally.
Okay. Any other quick responses?
If your business model is predicated on profiling customers and selling advertisements, it is a conflict. So that's not about service providers specifically, but just in general, it can be very difficult, and that's where regulation can help.
Yep.
Right. Totally
And
agree.
your privacy terms and conditions can be made user-friendly. It doesn't have
The
to
fine print.
be pages of legal document that this is our privacy policy. You can really translate that into an easy to understand consumer language rather than legalese.
Okay. All right. Very good. Well, listen, this has been a great conversation. Thanks to Marcio. Thank you to each of the panelists and to our sponsors who made all this possible. We do want to remind you again that our next big kind of the apex event for Parks Associates of the Year is the Connections Conference that's been virtualized this year, and it will be taking place November 10, 11, and 12. Elizabeth described some of the really interesting topics we'll be covering. And so you'll see things like, we'll give a state of the smart home market for the year, creating value through user experiences. We'll talk about the security industry. We'll talk about a variety of other topics. And so we hope that you'll join us and that you'll register online and be a part of that experience as well. Well, super. Well, it's been a great day. And so thanks for joining us again. Next up, you are invited to join us in two of our Zoom networking groups. One on data security networking and service providers, and one on data security manufacturers and support. Again, these links will be found at the bottom of the agenda in the swap card tab. But give us a minute and we'll launch those groups, and we hope that we'll see you there, and hope that our speakers will also join us there to interact with the audience. Thanks. Be safe. Be well. Have a great day.